test. I know that if you fail, some people might be let down, but the number one thing that causes people to fail the speaking. So what is the aim of this module? What do I want you to be able to do better at the end of this module than compared to right now? So I want to show you what works and what doesn't work. A major problem with IELTS is there's so much misinformation out there. There's so much confusing information out there. So one of my aims is to give you a little bit of clarity, a little bit of certainty on what works and what doesn't work. And we're going to remove doubt and fear and uncertainty. So a lot of you have a lot of doubts about this. You might be very stressed out about this, and you might be very uncertain because there is so much, conflicting and confusing information out there. So it's to remove that for you and give you the advice, tools and strategies you need to move to a band 7 or above. So I really only deal with students who need a 7 or above. That's my specialism. That's what I've done for years. If you need below a 7, this will definitely help you. But all of the stuff is kind of aimed at people who need a 7 or above. So what is this based on? So everything that I teach is based on the official marking criteria. It's not based on something that I heard or rumor or something that some person told me. It's all based on what IELTS say. So you can be confident that this is what the examiners are looking for, and you'll be able to give it to the examiners. So everything in this course, everything in this module is based on that. And it's also based on years of experience. So I have taught thousands of IELTS students over the years. I started off at International House in the British Council, and then I set up IELTS Advantage, and I have my IELTS VIP course, and basically I just get up every day and help people with their IELTS scores. That's what I do day in, day out. So everything is based on what works and what doesn't, because I work very, very closely with my VIP students, and I figured out over years and years of what works and what doesn't. So it's based on that, and thousands of tests in my VIP group. So one of the things that I do in my VIP group is I do a lot of one-on-one speaking tests with students over Skype, where I give them feedback on what they're doing right and what they're not doing as well as they could be. I also do Zoom sessions twice a week. It's kind of like a digital classroom where I get in and I run speaking tests with all of my students in there. So I'm just constantly helping students with their speaking. So a lot of this is based on that. And it's a distillation, really boiling down my full VIP course. So I have a full IELTS speaking course, 12 modules, very, very long, detailed course. What I decided to do was just take the most important elements of that and put it into this fundamentals course. It's obviously not as long and as detailed as the full course, because we can't squeeze everything into a 30-45 minute lesson, but it's the essentials, it's the fundamentals, and it's really going to help you. So what is this module not about? It's not a miracle cure. All right, we are not one of these companies that say, join our course and we guarantee within 24 hours you will get a band 9. Like, that's just marketing gimmicks. We will show you what you need to do, and we will show you how you can move towards getting the score that you need. But it's not like you'll be able to just watch this video and immediately improve from a 5.5 to a band 8. It's not that. If you believe that that's possible, this is not the place for you. And you need to go to Fantasyland because that is fantasy. We can show you exactly what to do, but it is up to you to put in the work. So connected to the first point, we're going to show you exactly what you can do to get the score that you need. But don't think that you could, again, do really, really well on the test without actually putting in any work. If you think that that's possible, again, this might not be the course for you. And this is not a quick fix. If you want to be lied to, go somewhere else. So if you want to live in a fantasy land where someone is going to tell you all you have to do is follow my tips and tricks and hacks and you'll get the score that you need, They're lying to you. Again, I'll show you exactly what you need to do, but it's not a quick fix. You need to put in the work. I do not deal with students who will not work. I don't deal with lazy people who just won't put in any work, because that's just not who I am, and I don't want to deal with people like that. So what are we going to do today? We're going to look at an overview of the speaking test. Many of you will be aware of this, but I just want to cover it very, very quickly just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. We're going to look at, as I say, everything is going to be based on the official marking criteria. We're going to look at a strategy for each part of the test, part 1, part 2, part 3. And we're going to look at how to improve our grammar, our vocabulary, our fluency and coherence, and our pronunciation, because those are the 4 things that are covered on the official marking criteria. It's 25% grammar, 25% vocabulary, 25% fluency and coherence, and 25% pronunciation. So we're going to work on those key skills and systems. And we're also going to show you how you can practice at home for free and how you can improve at home by yourself if you want to, or if you want extra help, we can show you how to do that also. But what I'll always do with these courses, and what I always do, is here's a free option where you can do it by yourself without spending any money, and here's a paid option. If you want a bit of extra help and you want to spend a bit of money, here's how you can do that. So that's how we organize things here, and that's how we help people. So an overview of the speaking test. Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. Very, very simple. So Part 1 is going to be everyday familiar questions. Part 2 is the long turn or the monologue, where you'll be given 1 minute to prepare and you have to speak for up to 2 minutes. And then Part 3, they will ask you more abstract questions in Part 3. A lot of people think this is the most difficult part, but we'll get into that. But basically, this is an overview of the test. Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. Let's get into each of these in a little bit more detail. So typical Part 1 question. So I took this from the British Council website. The reason why I did that is I don't believe in creating fake questions. Be very, very careful. A lot of websites, what they do is they create fake questions. What I'm going to just show you is these are the questions that the British Council have on their website. It's not that I'm copying them. I'm showing you that where I'm getting them from, but just reiterate the point. Only use official questions from official sources, because you don't want to be misled by fake questions. So let's look at some of these questions. So what kind of place is your hometown? What's the most interesting part of your town? What kind of jobs do the people in your town do? Tell me about the kind of accommodation you live in. How long have you lived there? What do you like about living there? What sort of accommodation would you most like to live in? So one question is about your hometown. The other question is about your accommodation, where you live. You might be asked about your family, about your job. Very everyday, familiar questions about you. Okay, so for me, this is the easiest part of the question, or part of the test, because they're just answering normal, everyday questions that, for example, if you met someone new, let's say you joined a new English class and you were talking to your colleagues or talking to your classmates, or you started a new job, just everyday normal questions about you. And they're not very difficult. And the main thing to remember is they're about you. You can't mess them up. It doesn't require a very advanced level answer, because they're just normal everyday questions about you. Part 2 questions. It's impossible to predict what topic you will get for Part 2. One thing that students love is they try to hack the test, they try to shortcut the test. I have looked at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different Part 2 questions. It's impossible to predict what topic you're going to get for Part 2, so don't even try. So let's look at an example. Describe something you own which is very important to you. You should say where you got it from, how long you have had it, what you use it for, and explain why it is important to you. So it always will be in this format. They'll give you a piece of paper with this on it, and it will have a topic, a main topic at the top here. Describe something you own which is very important to you, and then they'll say you should say, and then there'll be 4 bullet points. So that's always the format. It's a very, very difficult to predict what topic will come up, but again, most topics, 99% of topics, you will be familiar with them. Part 3 questions. Let's consider first of all how people's values have changed. So that's something the examiner might say to you to introduce the topic. What kind of things give status to people in your country? Have things changed since your parents' time? So related to that first question. Finally, let's talk about the role of advertising. Do you think advertising influences what people buy? So look at the difference between these part 3 questions and part 1 questions. Part 1 questions are about you. Part 3 questions are about ideas. They're about abstract ideas. What kind of things give status to people in your country? So they're not asking you about you and your status. What they're doing is they're asking you more abstract ideas, kind of like an academic task 2 writing question. This is more like the style of question you would get in a writing test rather than in part 1 or part 2 of the speaking test. And this is why people find this a little bit trickier. But we'll get in detail. We'll have a strategy for these types of questions. We'll talk about them in more detail. But it's really important to identify the differences between part 1 questions, part 2 questions, and part 3 questions. Part 1, normal everyday questions about you. Part 2, one topic, talk for 2 minutes. Part 3, getting more in-depth into the part 2 topic, more abstract academic style questions. You don't have to answer them in an academic way, but it's just the style of question that you're going to get. And it's important to know that because each of the different parts requires a different approach and a different strategy. So 3 sections, 3 different styles of answers. Part 1, normal familiar topics that require a short answer. I put short in quotation marks because what short means to some people means something different to other people. These questions are all about you. Part 2, you should be familiar with the vast majority of topics here and requires you to speak for up to 2 minutes. And this is a monologue where you just talk by yourself. I put in here, you should be familiar with the vast majority of topics here. A lot of people come to me and they say, I got this topic in task or part 2 speaking and I've no idea I don't know anything about the topic. In the vast majority of cases, that's because you're looking at fake questions. If you look at real questions, they're about things that 99% of people on the planet will be able to talk about. Part 3, more abstract questions. These questions are more about ideas than about you, and they require a significant amount of development. So the big difference between part 1 and part 3 is the length of the answer. Part 1, quite short, and we're going to get into how long they should be in a minute. Part 3, you're really going to have to develop your answer more because it's more of a discussion of ideas rather than just a short answer to a familiar question. So part 1 strategy. It's impossible to get these wrong, okay? So they're asking about you. So often when I have a new student and I do a mock speaking test with them, and they spend an awful lot of time trying to think of the answer to part 1 questions, and then they give an answer, and it's obvious that they are answering it in what I call test mode rather than just naturally answering the question. So these questions are about you, and it's impossible to get them wrong because it's just about you and your experience. Just be honest with the examiner and you'll be absolutely fine. You simply answer them in the same way you would if you were talking to a friend or a classmate or a colleague. What I normally tell students is when they have this problem is they give me the answer to the question and I ask them, if your friend asked you that question, would you answer it in the same way, in the same style? And they say, no, why? Because IELTS want this or IELTS want that, or my friend told me that IELTS want this. No, IELTS just want you to clearly communicate with the examiner. You do that in part 1 by just answering the questions naturally. Simply answer the question and then add extra details, explanations, or examples or personal stories. So let's look at some length of answers. So do not count sentences, all right? Students are obsessed with word count in the writing test and number of sentences and number of words in the speaking test. It's silly to think like that because it's not that important. And if you're starting to think like, how many sentences have I just made, you're not really going to focus on what's important is clearly communicating with the examiner in a fluent way. But most part 1 questions are going to be between 2 and say 5 sentences. If it's 2 or under, it's probably a little bit too short. If you're going over 5 sentences, probably a little bit too long. Sweet spot's kind of in between 2 and 5, and it just depends totally on the question and how you're able to answer it. But don't get too obsessed with how long it is. Focus a lot more on, have I actually answered the question? So let's look at some examples. So what do you like about living there? So talking about your neighborhood, where you live, your town that you live in. So if you answered it, I like it because it's quiet and peaceful, that's way too short. It's way too short because you haven't developed your answer at all. You haven't given the examiner anything really to go on. You haven't really shown that you can use grammar or vocabulary. It's just one short, simple sentence. So obviously that's too short. I like the shops, the amenities, the people, the peaceful atmosphere, the open spaces and the schools there. Again, this isn't good either. What this person has done is just give a list of things that they like, but they haven't developed it in any way. So this person does like shops and amenities and people and peaceful atmosphere and open spaces and the schools, and that's great. But it would be better if they just picked 1 or 2 things and then explained why they like the shops or why they like the amenities or an example of the amenities or an example of the shops, and answered it in that way. For example, I like it because it's quiet and peaceful. It's on the outskirts of the city and there are no other houses or factories around it, which means there's very little noise. So at night we can sit outside as a family and have dinner and chat in peace. Okay, so let's look at this question. What has this person done? So first of all, they've answered the question. The bit in red, that's just a direct answer to the question. But you need to go a little bit further than that. You need to develop it. The bit in blue is an explanation of why they like it, because it's quiet and peaceful. So it's on the outskirts of the city. It's on the outside of the city. So normally that's quiet and peaceful. Maybe some countries it's not, but most countries it is. And there are no other houses or factories around it, which means there's very little noise. And again, just further explaining why they like it in relation to their direct answer. Now they've given a personal story, an example. So at night we can sit outside as a family and have dinner and chat in peace. Okay, so they've answered the question, they've given an explanation, and they've gave an example, a personal story. Now, do you answer every single question by answer the question, explain it, give an example? Answer the question, explain it, give an example? No, don't behave like a robot. But I'm just giving you the tools and showing you how you can develop your answer fully for part 1. Most of the time you are going to answer the question and then you're going to explain it, and you can explain it in that way by giving an explanation, or you can use an example or a personal story or something like that. Do not overthink this, all right? The examiners are not looking for clunky strategies where every single answer sounds exactly the same. I'm just giving you the tools to enable you to fully develop and give a full answer for part 1. But just answer it naturally. Be honest. If they ask you, what do you like about living there? You could say, I don't like anything about living there. And here's the reason why I don't like living there at all. And plus, what do you like about living there? There are thousands of reasons why you might like living there. Just pick one, explain it, use an example, use a personal story, something like that, between 2 and 5 sentences around that, and you'll be absolutely fine. So here's another example. And what kind of jobs do the people in your town do? Answer: this is an interesting question, which I will divulge the answer to henceforth. Due to the developing nature of our conurbation, the employment opportunities have been waning in recent times, and the categories of employment are various. That's nonsense, all right? That's absolute nonsense. And that is someone who has either memorized an answer and they've just inserted it in, or they have just memorized a bunch of academic phrases and so-called high-level words and just entered it into a sentence. That's not answering the question at all. Be very, very careful with memorized answers, memorized chunks of language, memorized words. You're not going to be able to actually answer the question. Many students just read that and went, oh my God, that's amazing. look at the vocabulary that they've used, look at the structure. Oh, that's so advanced. It's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. It's not answering the question. It's just showing off memorized chunks of language, which is the exact opposite to what you do. So let's look at the difference between that and this. Most people are unskilled laborers. It's not a very rich town and most people are not educated, so they tend to get jobs as workers in factories or in construction. For example, there's a new factory on the edge of town that makes electronics, and many people found employment there recently, right? So keeping it simple, answering the question, the bit in red, explanation, the bit in blue, here's an example, the bit in orange, all right? Very easy to understand, very clear, and you're focusing on clearly answering the question and clearly communicating with the examiner. Now, do you have to say most people are unskilled laborers? No, whatever is good for you, whatever works for you. So in your town, most people could be lawyers and doctors. In your town, most people could be teachers. It doesn't matter. Just pick a job or a group of jobs, say it, explain it, use an example, or just add in a bit of extra detail. You don't always have to use an example in part one. It's just showing you how you can fully develop your answers for part one. Just focus on answering the question in whatever way is appropriate for you, because it is about you. Just answer the question for you. So simply answer the question, explain it, and add some extra details or examples. The questions are about you, so it's impossible to get them wrong. For most answers, you will not even need a strategy, all right? So if they say, what's your job? You don't have to think, okay, how am I going to answer this? I answer the question, then I explain it, and then I give an example. Like, that's not how you're going to answer that question. If you are a doctor, you're just going to say, yeah, I'm a doctor, and then just add a little bit of extra detail in. Where do you live? I live in Ho Chi Minh City, or I live in Delhi, or I live in London. And just give a little bit of extra detail and help people out with that. Okay? Pretty straightforward. Just focus on communicating with the examiner, not speaking to them like a robot. So these strategies, do not go in thinking, I'm going to only think about strategy. And just say, my name is such and such, I am from like, you're going to sound like a robot. Speak to them like you would speak to a friend or a colleague or a classmate, and everything just gets much better if you do that. For most people, part one does not need a strategy at all. I just wanted to show you that because a lot of people overthink it, overcomplicate it. They've been told many different things by many different teachers. Most of the teachers don't know what they're talking about. So I thought I would just provide some clarity and a removed doubt about part one. Never memorize answers. The examiners are not stupid, all right? The examiners know exactly what you're doing. If you memorize answers and you just go, okay, I'm going to be asked about my job, I'm going to be asked about my hometown, I'm going to be asked about this, and you memorize an answer, and somebody says, where are you from? And you start talking about the architecture, and you give like a rundown of the history of that city, and you don't stop talking for 5 minutes, it's obvious that you've memorized that answer. Just answer the questions naturally, and you'll really impress the examiner. Speak like a human being, not a robot, obviously, and relax. Part one is designed so that you can ease into the test. The real challenges are going to be in part two and part three, okay? The exam kind of gets more difficult as you go through the test. The most difficult questions will probably be the last questions that you are asked in part three. Part one is so that you can just warm up and relax and ease into the test. Do not overthink things in part one. Just naturally answer the questions. And pretend that you're speaking to a friend. I know that it is a very stressful test. I know that it is a life-changing test. I know that if you fail, some people might be let down. But the number one thing that causes people to fail the speaking test is they speak to the examiner like they are a recording device, and they use memorized answers, and they speak in a very formal academic style. And that causes a huge number of problems, both in grammar and vocabulary and fluency and pronunciation. Just speak to them like they're a friend. Some of the examiners will not be very nice. They will not, some students get put off by the examiners because they're not friendly or they don't smile. Just for that 15 minutes, pretend that you're speaking to a friend and everything will get much better, no matter what the examiner does. So let's move on to part 2. This is where it gets a little tricky for some students, but it doesn't need to be tricky. It doesn't need to be difficult. Many students are not used to speaking for 2 minutes. If you try and do this, if you've never done this before in a foreign language, it's actually a very long time. It is a challenge, but it is not a challenge that cannot be overcome. The main reasons why students mess this up is because of lack of practice. For many students, the first time they ever speak for 2 minutes is in the IELTS test, and then they wonder why they fail. An even bigger problem is lack of feedback. So either you have a teacher that doesn't know what they're talking about and is giving you bad feedback and is actually doing more harm than good, or you are getting your feedback from other students who do not know what they're talking about. Most students are students. They're not teachers. They don't really know what the examiners are looking for. Or you just get no feedback whatsoever. So you don't know where you're going wrong, or if you're doing anything wrong, or if you're doing anything right. And then another big reason why people don't do so well in part 2 is there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of strategies that just harm students more than they help students. And there's a lot of myths and a lot of misinformation, a lot of conflicting information. So what I'm going to tell you is just, here's the truth, here's a strategy, not the only strategy, but here's a strategy that will really, really help you do well in part 2. And this works amazingly well for my students. So let's look at some of the problems that students have with part 2. So describe something you own which is very important to you. You should say where you got it from, how long you've had it, what you use it for, and explain why it is important to you. Okay, so the main problems that I see with students is what they do is they look at this topic and they pick something and then they talk about first bullet point, where you got it from. Okay, so I'm going to talk about my bike. I got it from my dad. Then they talk about the second bullet point. I've had it for 2 years. I use it to ride to school. And then they talk about the fourth bullet point. It's important to me because my dad got it and it means that I can get to school on time. So within about 20 or 30 seconds, they've run out of things to say because they've talked about bullet point number 1, then bullet point number 2, then bullet point number 3, then bullet point number 4. And then it gets to about 30 seconds or 1 minute and they're like, that's all I have to say. So if you stop before the 2 minutes, you're going to be in major problems. You're going to be in major trouble. So what you need to do is you need a strategy that will enable you to fluently speak for up to the 2 minutes until the examiner stops you. Just following this bullet point, then that bullet point, then that bullet point, then that bullet point causes major issues. Why? Some of the bullet points you will not be able to talk about for very long. How long have you had it? I've had it for 2 years. My dad got it for me for Christmas. What more can you say about that? It's really difficult to talk fluently. The key is that you have to talk fluently, naturally about something. It's really difficult to talk about that for more than 10, 20 seconds. What also happens is they get to a bullet point that they're not very confident about speaking. Explain why it is important to you. For some people, that would be difficult to explain. So they get to this bullet point and they're like, it's important to me because my dad got it for me. I don't know. Then you get into fluency problems again. So what I've done with my students is I developed a strategy that means that you do not have to rely on these bullet points, and I give them ways to easily talk about this topic, this main topic, for the 2 minutes, because that's the goal. For the 2 minutes, you have to talk about something which you own, which is very important to you, fluently and coherently. That's the goal. So what I did was I developed a strategy that allows students to do that, and it works amazingly well. So what is a strategy? So you must talk about the main topic, and you must do this in a fluent way for up to 2 minutes. However, you do not need to stick to the bullet points. Talk about them in order, or even talk about them at all. Okay, so look back. You should say. It doesn't say you must say. It doesn't say you have to say. It just says you should say. What they're doing here is they're just giving you some bullet points to help you out. These are just some cues. They are not things that you absolutely must talk about and in the order that you've been given them. The stupidest thing I ever saw was one teacher online was saying, talk about this one for 30 seconds, then talk about this one for 30 seconds, then talk about this one for 30 seconds, and then talk about this one for 30 seconds. How are you able to work out in an exam situation 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 30 seconds? That's just crazy. You do not need to do that. The only thing that you must do is you must talk about this topic at the top. Describe something you own, which is very important to you. You 100% must talk about that for the 2 minutes. You can't talk about anything else. You can talk about these things, but it's totally optional. So I'll repeat that. However, you do not need to stick to the bullet points. Talk about them in order, or even talk about them at all. Use the bullet points as a tool to help you, not as a crutch to support you. There are many other things that you can talk about related to that main topic. So for example, you could introduce the topic. You could describe the topic. You could say how you feel about the topic. You could tell a personal story. You could use an example. You could talk about the past, the present, the future, or you could use the bullet points. It's totally up to you. But this strategy, what it does is it gives you freedom to talk about many different things. Are you going to talk about all of these things in 2 minutes? Of course not. No. Totally optional. What you're going to do is you are going to pick the things, including the bullet points, that you feel most comfortable talking about, and you'll be able to talk about for 2 minutes in a fluent, coherent way. So let's look at an example. So let's imagine that you get this question and you know, okay, I'm going to talk about the bike that my dad got me. So I'm not going to talk about this bullet point because it's really short, and I'm going to be talking about that anyway when I'm talking about where you got it from, because I'm going to say like my dad got it for me for Christmas 2 years ago. I'm not going to explain why it is important to me because I just don't know what to say about that. I just don't feel comfortable talking about that. But I do feel comfortable telling the story of when my dad got it for me on Christmas Day. I feel really comfortable talking about that. It's something that I'm aware of. It's something that I find very easy to talk about. I'm also very comfortable describing the bike. So I'm going to talk about the gears and the brakes and whatever else to do with the bike. And I'm also comfortable talking about the future. So I'm going to talk about how I'm going to use this bike in the future. So I want to get, for example, I want to get fit. So I'm going to use it to go on long bike rides on the weekends to keep fit. So you see how easy it is to talk for 2 minutes when you have the flexibility of just picking the things that will help you talk about that. So you pick whichever bullet points you want to talk about and then add in whichever things, and here's a list of things, possible things that you could talk about, and it's very easy to talk about that for 2 minutes. Now, sometimes you will use all the bullet points. Sometimes the bullet points will be amazing and you'll be able to talk about them no problem, and you might just add in one thing. Sometimes you won't be able to talk about any of the bullet points. Very rare, but it could happen, and you want to talk about a personal story and about the past and the present and the future and a description of it and all of those different things. Allow yourself to talk clearly and coherently for 2 minutes and everything improves. So number one, this is a strategy. Look at the question. Decide which of the bullet points you feel comfortable talking about. Add other things you would like to talk about. So you'll have a minute to prepare. So your minute is just doing all of these things. Make a plan and or think about your answer. So the reason why I put and or think about your answer, some students find it very useful and they can quickly in 1 minute write out a really detailed plan. And they really, really like that. Other students just like to sit there, make minimal notes and think about, visualize what they're going to talk about and then go into it. Some people, like me, when I'm doing this, I'm kind of in between the two. I make some notes and I think about what I'm doing at the same time. Figure out what works for yourself. Speak until the examiner stops you. It is very, very, very important that you speak for the 2 minutes. Do not stop. In the test, time will do strange things. A lot of students, they think that they've spoken for 2 minutes, and what really happens is they've only spoken for about 30 seconds. In a stressful test situation, this can happen. Just keep talking. Just add in examples or personal stories or how you feel about it or a description or any of these different things, and the examiner will stop you. Believe me, they will stop you. They do not want to sit there listening to you longer than is needed. So it's essential that you practice this before the exam. Like any strategy, one of the strangest things that I find is I give students like a step-by-step strategy for how to answer a reading question. And they look at it for 30 seconds, they attempt the question, and they're like, that strategy doesn't work. It's like, of course it doesn't work. You didn't learn the strategy, you didn't apply it, you didn't practice it, you didn't get used to it, you didn't actually master that strategy. This strategy is extremely effective. It does work, but you need to practice. You need to practice a lot to get into the frame of mind of, using it and being able to do it on test day. Once you practice this strategy enough, it will be like riding a bike. So imagine you're learning how to ride a bike, or learning how to drive a car, or learning how to tie your shoelaces. When you first were doing that, you had to fully focus and fully think about absolutely everything that you were doing. Now when you're riding a bike, you just jump on, you don't even have to think about it. Now when you're driving a car, you don't have to think like put on seatbelt, check indicator, check mirrors, check all this, do that. You just do it naturally. Same with this strategy and any strategy that I'll teach you on this course. I'll show you later how you can practice this at home for free. So part 3. Part 3, in my opinion, is the most difficult part. It requires you to discuss ideas and develop your answers fully. Do not worry if you get very difficult questions. The examiner will ask you more difficult questions if they think you are good. So the examiners have a range of questions. If you're like a band 5 student, they're going to ask you just a few quite easy questions in part 3. If they think you're a band 7, 8 or 9 student, they're really going to test you. They're really going to stretch your ability by asking you increasingly difficult questions. So if you get difficult questions, be happy about it. It means that they think that you're good. The key is to attempt the question and do your best. The worst thing you can do in part 3 is just say, I don't know anything about that, or I don't know. It would surprise you how many students just are like, I don't know. If you do that, you're basically telling the examiner, I've reached my limit. I can't go any further. I'm not as good as you think I am. And you're not giving yourself any chance whatsoever. So let's look at some typical part 3 questions. So what kind of things give status to people in your country? Have things changed since your parents' time? So related to that first question. Do you think advertising influences what people buy? So this is not a discussion of like, where do you live, where are you from, what job are you having, normal everyday questions. These are abstract ideas. They want you to discuss ideas, to demonstrate that you have the ability to discuss these ideas. That is why they are a little bit tricky, because a lot of students are just not used to doing this, or they don't have a strategy to do this. And they're much, much easier to discuss than you think. And the other thing to remember about the speaking test is there are no marks for good ideas. There are marks for grammar, there are marks for vocabulary, there are marks for fluency and coherence, there are marks for pronunciation. There are no marks for amazing ideas or good ideas. What they want you to do in part 3 is demonstrate that you can speak, and just use these questions to show that you can speak. All right? So they're not interested in knowledge. They're not interested in IQ. It is not a knowledge test. It is not an IQ test. It is a speaking test. So just use these questions to demonstrate to the examiner that you can speak. So part 3 strategy number 1. First of all, you have to understand the question. Do not be afraid to ask the examiner 2 questions. Can you please repeat the question? what does some word mean or word phrase mean. Often in part 3, you'll get a question and you'll first hear it and you'll be like, not 100% sure what that means. I'm 90% sure, but I'm not 100% sure. You can ask the examiner, sorry, can you repeat that question? And they'll repeat the question. Do not do it for every single question, all right? Like when they ask you, where are you from? Don't say, sorry, could you repeat the question? Don't do that. That's silly. Some students do. But the other really important thing you can do is you can ask them to explain what a word means. So the other day I was doing a mock speaking test with a student and I said, what are the drawbacks of low-cost air travel? And she didn't fully understand the question and she started talking about buses. So because what she heard was low-cost travel. So she started talking about buses are cheap and it's a really good idea to get to travel by bus. But there are some drawbacks with buses, and started talking about the drawbacks of buses. But the key word here was air travel. It's about low-cost airlines flying in the sky. And what I said to her was, did you hear air? And she was like, no, I didn't really hear it. But if she had have said to me, can you repeat the question? It would have become clear. Or if she had have said, sorry, low-cost what travel? And I said air, like flying in an airplane, she would have got that. So always give yourself a chance to understand the question in part 3. The examiner will either explain it to you or they might paraphrase the question and say it in a different way. Strategy number 2, attempt the question. If you get a difficult question, you should be very, very, very happy. That means the examiner respects your ability to speak in English and they think you're doing very, very well. Don't laugh or say something like, that's a difficult question. Certain countries, when it's just the way the culture is, that when they don't understand something fully or they find something difficult, what they do is they just start laughing. It's like they're nervous or something and they just start laughing. The examiner is not going to be impressed by that. The examiner is not going to be like, oh, it's your culture and I understand you're just nervous. The examiner is just going to hear you laughing instead of answering the question. And don't just say like, oh, that's a difficult question, I don't know, can I have a different question? Attempt the question. Again, it's not a knowledge test, it's not an IQ test. Just say whatever you think about that question. Even if you know nothing about it, explain why you don't know anything about it. For example, I had a really nice student and she was from Saudi Arabia. And because of her religion, she wasn't familiar with music concerts. So the question was about music concerts and about musical instruments. And instead of her just saying, I don't know anything about that, what she did was she said, well, to be honest, because of my religion, I've never been to a music concert. I've never played a musical instrument because it's forbidden by my religion. If I could, I'd love to attend a music concert and I'd love to play the guitar. I've always sort of dreamed of playing the guitar. But for me, it's kind of impossible because of my religion. Compare that answer with, I don't know anything about that, or laughing. See what I mean? Attempt the question. Even if you don't know anything about it, be honest with the examiner and tell them that. If you really have no idea, be honest with the examiner. Don't be afraid to lie, all right? So a lot of students say things like, so the question could be about hats. And they say, like, I've never worn a hat. So I say, okay, so you can either tell the examiner you've never worn a hat, or just make it up. Just say, like, I really like wearing baseball caps. Like, it's not an honesty test. It is not a lie detector test. It is a speaking test. The most important thing is you need to develop your answer. It is imperative that you fully address the questions asked. Not like in part 1 where it's just like a 2 or 3 sentence answer. Part 3, you really need to develop your answers. Think of it as a task 2 writing question. You need explanations, you need examples, you need to show both sides of the argument sometimes. The examiner must fully understand your position, what you think, or what you discuss other ideas on that question. So very simply, a real simple strategy for part 3 is answer the question, explain, give an example, and sometimes show the other side. But do it more than you would with part 1. You're obviously going to expand your examples. You're going to tell, more detailed, have more detailed explanations, and you might also show the other side. So let's see what this looks like. So do you think advertising influences what people buy? So you're like, yes, it is. Here's why that is true. Here's an example. Right, you're not going to say this. This is not your answer. But this is the overall strategy. Here's one way that you could answer it. You could say, yep, advertising does influence what people buy. Here's why I think that's true, or here's why other people think that's true. Here's an example or a personal story of why that's true. Or you could say, no, it doesn't. Here's why that's true. Here's an example, or here's a story to prove that. Or you could combine the two above. You could say, some people think, yeah, it does. Advertising does influence people, and explain why those people would think that, an example of why those people would think that. But other people don't believe that at all. They think the opposite. Here's why they think that. Here's an example. So here's, this is not a perfect answer that you should copy, and you copy the language. Obviously the questions you get are going to be completely different. This is just to demonstrate the strategy. So some would say that it does, because companies spend billions every year on advertising. So some people agree with this. Why would they do that if it doesn't work? An explanation. For example, Coca-Cola has billboards and TV advertisements in every country in the world, and most people choose Coke if they want to buy a cola. So here's an example to prove why people think that. However, now talking about the other side, others would disagree and say that it doesn't influence what people buy, because there are thousands of smaller brands that have no advertising budget and they do just fine. I buy all my clothes from a small charity shop, which obviously doesn't spend too much money on ads. So you're using a personal story, a personal example to help you with that. Now, if I was answering this question, I'd obviously give a little bit more detail. I'd extend it even more, but I can't fit that onto a slide. Don't look at this question and be like, this is the only way to answer a part 3 question. It's not. It's just a demonstration of the strategy. So don't stick to one strategy rigidly, all right? The strategy that I give you are very flexible. If you stick to strategies rigidly, you'll sound like a robot. You'll focus more on strategy than actually answering the question. So what a lot of students do is, some teachers teach them a strategy, and every question they get asked, they're like, okay, how can I fit this in to this rigid strategy? What I'm doing here is I'm just giving you the tools that will allow you to flexibly answer any part 3 question. But you must practice. You must practice with these types of questions. Practice answering the question, explaining why, using examples, personal stories, showing the other side. Just like the part 2 strategy, you have to practice this before you're able to do it in the test. And the more you do it, the easier it will become. So let's move. Those are the 3 strategies for each part of the test. Now let's move on to speaking skills and systems, particularly fluency, pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary. Why are we going to focus on these 4 things? Because each is 25% of your total mark. 25% for fluency and coherence, 25% for pronunciation, 25% for grammar, 25% for vocabulary. Notice that there's no 25% or any percent for ideas or IQ or how smart you are or anything like that. They just want to hear, can you fluently answer a question that makes sense? Can you be understood by the examiner? How's your pronunciation? How's your grammar? How's your vocabulary? If you can do that, no problem at all. So let's get into each of these in a little bit more detail. So fluency. This does not mean speaking quickly. All right? The number of students who just try to speak very, very quickly and say like, that shows I'm really good at it. I'm going to get a very high mark for fluency, teacher. Like, no, that's not what fluency is. Fluency means speaking naturally, without unnatural pausing and hesitation and repetition. The key word there is unnatural. Everybody pauses, everybody hesitates, everybody repeats themselves sometimes. It's just how human beings speak to each other. The key word there is an unnatural amount, if you're pausing all the time and you're hesitating all the time and you're repeating your ideas, then you're going to get a lower mark for fluency. It's just about speaking naturally as you would in your native language. Most people have poor fluency for two reasons: language-related problems and content-related problems. By language, I'm talking about grammar and vocabulary. By content, I'm talking about thinking of ideas, the actual content of the answer to the question. So fluency problems. Think of your brain as a computer. The part that deals with speech and language is just like your operating system. It's just like your operating system on your computer or your phone. If there are too many programs open at the same time, your computer will slow down. So you probably experienced this when you have, 10,000 tabs open on your browser and, 5 or 6 different programs open. What happens to your computer? It becomes very slow and it becomes very sluggish. Same with your speech. If you're thinking about too many things, you are going to pause, you're going to hesitate, you're going to repeat yourself. Your fluency is going to go down. We want to close as many programs as possible and make your computer run properly. So in the test, what we want you to be doing is totally focusing on clearly answering the question, clearly communicating with the examiner. So we don't want you thinking about grammar too much. We don't want you thinking about ideas too much. We don't want you thinking of vocabulary too much, because if you do those things, then your fluency is going to suffer. It's a balancing act between fluency and thinking about grammar, vocabulary, ideas. Now, I didn't say don't think of grammar, don't think of vocabulary, don't think of ideas. Obviously, that would be a stupid thing to say, but we want to minimize the amount that you're thinking about them. We don't want you to overthink things. So language. Thinking about grammar and vocabulary will cause fluency problems. This is not your fault. This is probably your old teacher's fault or the culture where you learned English. In many countries, particularly in Asia, they really focus on 100% accuracy when it comes to grammar and vocabulary. And the most important thing is you get everything correct. And there is very little attention to actually producing the language in a fluent way. The more you think about grammar and vocabulary, the more likely it is that you will have problems with fluency. There are two solutions to this. Long term, improve your grammar and vocabulary. The better your grammar and vocabulary, the less you're going to have to think about it in the test, the better your fluency is going to become. The short-term solution, relax. All right? To get a band 7, your grammar does not need to be perfect. To get a band 7, your vocabulary does not need to be perfect. Relax about your use of language. Something that I used to do with my students who had this problem was I would give them 2 part 2 tests. And I would say, okay, first test, do what you normally do. Try and get all the grammar and the vocabulary correct. And then the second one, I would say, okay, for this one, don't worry about grammar, don't worry about vocabulary, just focus on answering the questions. Just focus on fluency. And they made the same number of grammar and vocabulary mistakes in both tests. But in the second test, they were way more fluent, all right? And they did really, really well, because you don't have to have perfect grammar, perfect vocabulary to get a band 7, which most of you need. So the quickest fix that I can give you, and I don't like quick fixes, but this really does help students, especially if you were brought up in a country that focuses more on accuracy than fluency. Relax about your grammar and vocabulary. It doesn't need to be perfect. You're not going for perfection. So here's an exercise. Get a part 2 question, record yourself doing a 2-minute monologue. First time, focus on grammar and vocabulary. Second time, focus on fluency. You'll be amazed at the results. You'll be amazed at how different you sound. You don't have to send this in to me or anything like that, but if you're serious about getting the score you need, this exercise will take you 5 minutes, record it on your phone, and you will see an amazing improvement from the second one from the first one. You'll also hear lots of grammar and vocabulary mistakes. Being aware of those is also good. So, practice. Why is the average score for listening the highest, reading second, speaking third, and writing fourth? So it's not unusual for people to get like a band 8, 8.5 for listening, and then like a band 7.5, 8 for reading, and then a band 7 for speaking, and then a band 6.5, 6 for writing. Normally, listening and reading are quite high. Speaking third. Lastly, we have writing. It's probably the average scores are 5.5 worldwide for writing. Why is that? Because you get a lot of practice with listening. You're constantly taking in English through TV, being in class, watching movies. You're constantly practicing that skill. Same with reading. You're often reading in English, whether you read the news in English or on Facebook or whatever. You're practicing that skill quite a bit. But speaking and writing, very rarely do you practice it. Think about the amount of time, compare the amount of time that you practice listening, even just passively, to the amount of time speaking and writing. Why do you have fluency problems? Probably you just don't speak enough. All right. A number of students that I deal with say, I really want to get a band 7 in speaking. It's like, okay, how often do you practice speaking? Never. It's like, okay, how do you think you're going to improve? I don't know. I don't know how to practice speaking, and I don't want to really practice speaking, but I want a band 7 in speaking. It's like, okay. The more you practice, the better you will become. All right. So it sounds really simple, and you might be like, well, tell me something I don't know. You do know that the more you speak, the more fluent you're going to become, but you have to speak. If you don't know where to practice in this day and age, when we have everything at our fingertips, you're just creating excuses. The number of students that come to me and they're like, I know I need to practice speaking, but I don't know how to do it. It's like, do you know how to use Google? Yes, okay, there's your answer. There are thousands of ways that you can practice your speaking at home for free or for a very small amount of money with native English speakers or with other students. If you think that you cannot do that, then you're just creating excuses. You don't really want to get the score. Pronunciation. There are two main concerns. Can the examiner understand everything you say? Can you use higher level pronunciation features? So we're going to talk about each of these. These are the two main concerns with pronunciation. The number one priority is clarity. If the examiner can't understand what you are saying, you will not get a 7 or above. If the examiner cannot understand what you are saying, you will not get a 7 or above. It doesn't matter how good your grammar is, doesn't matter how good your vocabulary is, doesn't matter how good your fluency is. If the examiner does not understand what you are saying, you're not going to get a 7 or above. All right, so the number one consideration with pronunciation is, am I speaking clearly? Can the examiner understand what I'm saying? Accent is not as important as you think. So a lot of people think that pronunciation and accent are the same thing. They are not. All right, they are very different. All right, accent and pronunciation are obviously connected in some way, but they're not as connected as you think. You do not get extra marks for sounding British or American. If somebody has a Vietnamese accent and somebody has a British accent, both of those people can get a band 9 in pronunciation in the speaking test. Because what they're focusing on is not what accent you have, it's whether you are easy to understand and or the higher level pronunciation features. Do not focus on being British and being American. You're wasting your time. Most non-native IELTS teachers who try to sound like this, they're pretty funny for native English speakers to listen to, but not effective. So one of the most annoying things I see is like people opening IELTS schools. And because they have a British accent, everybody thinks that they're good teachers. They're not. They're just good at accents. Having a British accent or an American accent does not mean that you know how to teach pronunciation. Also, you might think that their British accent or their American accent is impressive. No native English speaker thinks it is. So be very careful with that. Your accent is who you are. Be proud of it. What I hear from a lot of students is a lot of shame around their accent. They're like, oh, I have a really thick British or Indian accent, or I have a really thick Chinese accent, or this or that. Be proud of who you are. I know some Indian people who have amazing pronunciation and have an Indian accent. I also know other Indian people who have a very strong Indian accent and have very poor pronunciation, because pronunciation does not equal accent. There is often accent interference. That is a thing, but focus on sounding clear in your own accent and you'll do much better. So what are these higher level pronunciation features I talk of? So things like word stress, sentence stress, intonation, connected speech. These are things, if you want a 7 or above, especially if you want an 8 or a 9 in pronunciation, you're going to have to work on some of these things. I could make a whole course on this. So I love teaching pronunciation. It's kind of next to IELTS. It's my kind of my specialism. I can create a 24 module course just on pronunciation, and I'm actually doing that at the moment. Won't be ready for 6 months. 12 months maybe, so don't ask me about it, but what the point I'm trying to make is we won't be covering all of these things individually in this fundamentals course. Google IELTS pronunciation guide. I have a guide online that will cover absolutely everything you need. If I start getting into word stress, sentence stress, intonation, connected speech, how to sound clear, all of those different things, this video is going to be 6 hours long. It's a fundamentals course, so what I would suggest you do is just Google IELTS pronunciation guide, go to the IELTS Advantage website, and it will show you all of those different things. Grammar. You do not get extra marks for using every complex tense or grammar structure. Get this through your head immediately. What they are testing is not whether you can list every single tense and every single grammar structure. That's not how you get a high mark for grammar. You get extra marks for clearly communicating with the examiner. You should see grammar as a tool that will help you clearly communicate with the examiner, not a trick to help you get extra marks. So one of the stupidest things I've seen is, I saw this actually advertised in I'll not say where, in case the teacher is listening. But what they said was, learn the future perfect progressive tense, put it into your writing or put it into your speaking, and you'll get a band 9. Like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Learning one tense that's impressive and using it a couple of times, but then the rest of your grammar is terrible, is the best way to get a band 5. So don't think that all you have to do is just memorize lots of tenses and structures and then you'll get a high mark. That's not how you do it. There are two things you need to consider: range and accuracy. So range is using a range of different structures and tenses. It's not what you think though. And accuracy, saying sentences with no grammar errors in it. So grammar range. So let's look at some of these questions. What do you normally do on the weekend? So we'd use the present simple to talk about that. What did you do last weekend? Probably use past simple to talk about that. What's the best thing to do in your hometown on the weekend? Probably going to use a superlative structure. What will you do this weekend? Probably going to use future tenses. How has what people do on the weekend changed in recent years? So we're going to have to connect the past and the present. Probably you're going to use present perfect. Should people spend time with their friends or family on the weekend? So you're giving your opinion and you're also comparing other people's opinions and you're using comparatives. If you could do anything this weekend, what would you like to do? You're probably going to use conditional structures for this one. If I could do this, I would do this. So as you can see, the IELTS test is designed to test a range of different tenses and structures. Range takes care of itself. You will be asked so many different questions on the speaking test. The key is to identify the grammar structures you need to use and give them to the examiner. So imagine going into the test and they say, what do you normally do on the weekend? And you're like, okay, my teacher told me to use the future perfect progressive and to use past perfect continuous. And I'm going to use those, like that would just mean that you're not answering the question at all and you're really confusing yourself. Your fluency is terrible. You're making lots of mistakes. Wouldn't really be good. Instead, what you do is, okay, they're asking me what do you normally do on the weekend. That's about routine. It's about habitual behavior. Probably just going to use the present simple, and that's what I'm going to do. So what you do is you listen to each question, think about the grammar structures that you need to naturally answer that question effectively, and just do that. The range takes care of itself because you're going to be asked a range of different questions. So the key is just to think about the question, okay, what's the examiner want me to do, and to be able to do that. Accuracy is a much, much bigger problem than range. Range will take care of itself. The examiner will be listening for the number of errors you make. So if you're making multiple errors, especially people who are trying to use grammar structures that are well above their level, you're going to be making lots and lots and lots of errors. So here are some common errors. Articles, prepositions, tenses, countable, uncountable nouns, verb, subject, agreement, ing or to infinitive, complex sentences, conditionals, relative clauses, and on and on and on and on. There are many different things that you need to do properly, but here are just some of the common grammar errors. It is essential that you reduce the number of errors in your sentences. You should be aiming for more than 50% of your sentences to have no errors at all. So if you're hoping to get a 7 or above, most of your sentences should have no grammar errors at all. Look back here. There's quite a lot that can go wrong, all right? Does that mean that you'll never be able to produce an error-free sentence? No, you just need to follow a few steps. So how can you do this? How can you improve? So there's a slow way and there's a faster way, like most things in life. Slow way, do it all yourself, okay? Listen to your practice sessions and identify your own mistakes. So what you'll do is, if you want to do this the slow way, it's also the free way. So the slow way is always the way that, doesn't cost any money, but I always like to give people that option so that nobody accuses me of, just being interested in making money. And also I just know that many of you do not have any money or very little money. So I'm going to show you how to do that at home for free. So if you want to improve your grammar, record yourself on your phone doing practice questions or a whole speaking test, listen back and identify your own mistakes. And then do your own research and teach yourself. So let's say, for example, you listen and you obviously have a problem with articles using the or a or an or no article. So what you would do is you say, okay, I have a mistake here. I know that this is a big mistake. I'm making it in nearly every sentence. You go and do your own research, Google it, look up a lot of articles, learn all the rules yourself, teach yourself, practice yourself, and you can do it. Obviously, that's a little bit slower than having a teacher help you with it, but I also always like to give people the free way of doing things. A faster way, have a professional listen to you and identify your most common errors. So this could be your teacher at home, make sure they're a good teacher. It could be someone like me who listens to you, does a mock speaking test with you, or you send them your speaking and they say, okay, you've made 4 mistakes with subject-verb agreement. You've made 3 mistakes with articles and you've made 2 mistakes with tenses. These are your 3 common errors. This is what we need to work on. Learn from a specially designed course. So there are many different grammar courses out there. I have one. I shared one of the modules with you the other day in the grammar in the Facebook group. Sorry. So you can see if you have a specially designed course or a teacher that is really good at helping you with grammar, it's obviously going to help you. And then have your progress checked. So they identify your mistakes and then they teach you how to fix those mistakes, and then you go away and you work on that and then you make progress and they check your progress. Vocabulary. So let's look at vocabulary. You must use advanced or complex words. That's wrong. You must use idioms all the time. That's wrong. You cannot repeat any words. That's wrong. You should learn lists of academic words. That's wrong. You should learn lists of words related to common topics. That's wrong. Main reason why people fail the writing test and the speaking test is because of these vocabulary misconceptions. They have lots of teachers who tell them, learn lists, band 9 lists of advanced or vocabulary or list of words, and you'll do really well on the test. If that was true, then everybody would get a band 9. They don't. They don't work because they don't teach you how to use that vocabulary. A lot of teachers also say use idioms in every sentence. Listen to how native English speakers talk to each other. We do not use idioms in every sentence. A lot of other teachers tell you can never repeat a word. Think about how native English speakers talk to each other and listen to how many words they actually repeat. You should avoid repeating words in the speaking test as much as you can, but it's impossible not to repeat some words. Learn lists of academic words. The speaking test is not an academic test. The speaking test is the same for general training and academic students. It is supposed to represent how normal people speak to each other in a normal situation, not an academic setting. You should learn lists of words related to common topics. I've analysed every single speaking test that's happened over the last few years. There are no common topics. There are some part 1 common topics, part 2, part 3, there aren't. So how can you improve your vocabulary? Actively listen and read. If you don't know what this means, go and look at the vocabulary lesson that I posted in the Facebook group. Note down any new words. Learn them 100%. So again, if you don't know what this means, it's all covered in the separate vocabulary lesson that I posted in the Facebook group. Synonyms, pronunciation, collocation, antonyms, example sentences, use, style, grammar, all of these things that will help you use the word effectively. Take risks using your new words and note your mistakes. Treat mistakes as opportunities to learn and improve. All right, so when you're practicing, try to use the new vocabulary that you're learning, listen back, and if you're making mistakes, that's an opportunity to improve. And review regularly. So a lot of this is covered in detail in the vocabulary lesson. Go and have a look there. So now that you've learned the fundamentals of IELTS speaking, now you need to practice speaking and get feedback on it. So we've got a little treat for you. What we have done is we've created a process that will enable you to not only practice your speaking, but to upload it into the cloud and send it to us. So if you want feedback on your speaking and you want to practice your speaking and send it to us, all you have to do is just click the link below. You will download a PDF with step-by-step instructions on exactly what to do. So if you want to do that, just click the link below. And if you have any problems, feel free to get in touch with us. But all the step-by-step instructions are in the PDF below. Just click it below the video, download it, and then you will be able to read the instructions and send us your speaking. I look forward to hearing your speaking and helping you with it. See you soon. Bye-bye.